So I was scrolling through eBay the other night, and I found this a Dell Optiplex 7020 for just 10 bucks. Yeah, $10. At that price, you'd expect a dusty relic from the Windows XP era. Maybe something you'd use as a doorstop, but nope. This little guy still packs some modern DNA under the hood. The problem? These old office PCs are everywhere, and most people think they're useless for gaming. Too small, too weak, and too outdated. But what if they're wrong? Because here's the thing, these small form factor builds actually have a ton of hidden potential. With a few smart upgrades, the right GPU, a bit of RAM, maybe a better PSU, this boring office box could turn into a legit gaming rig. So today, we're gonna find out, can a $10 eBay PC like this Dell Optiplex 7020 actually become a gaming beast? Let's crack it open and see what it's got inside. So here's something you might not know. The total volume of this Dell Optiplex 7020 is only 7.8 liters. That's insanely compact, and trust me, once you crack it open, it feels tight. There's barely any room to breathe in there. If you're thinking about installing a full-size GPU, forget it. The only thing that fits in this case are low-profile cards, and ironically, those small cards usually cost more than you'd expect. So today, I'm going to try something different. A little trick that'll let you run any GPU you want without breaking the bank. Inside, it's rocking just one 8GB stick of DDR3 RAM. But the good news is there are still 3 empty slots. So upgrades are wide open. No SSD included, just an old DVD drive. Basically there for decoration at this point. The power supply is rated at 255 watts, which is actually decent for running most mid-range or budget GPUs, but there's only one PCIe slot, so forget about dual GPU dreams. First upgrade, a 500GB SATA SSD. Yeah, the SSD alone costs about twice as much as the whole PC. Alright, let's power it up and see if it still runs. And yup, booted right up. No issues. As for the CPU, it's running an old Pentium G3250, a 2-core, 2-thread chip. This CPU has a really low TDP, which means it's power efficient and won't make your electricity bill cry. But honestly, the thing I was most afraid of was testing any actual games on this weak little system. So I fired up Minecraft at the lowest settings possible. FPS hovered around 20 to 30, constantly stuttering and dropping frames. Even the simplest task, like walking or breaking a block, felt like wading through quicksand. The dual-core CPU was clearly running out of breath, and the single-channel ROM wasn't helping either. Then I decided to really push it. Dropped a bunch of TNT to see how it had handled the explosion. Yeah, it tanked straight down to 1 FPS. I mean, the fact that it didn't crash completely is kind of impressive in itself. When I bumped the resolution up to 720p, FPS fell even lower with way more lag and micro stutters. At this point, it's less of a gaming experience, more like watching a slideshow built out of patience. Alright, so I decided to throw Valorant at this tiny CPU just to see where it taps out. And man, it didn't last long. Even with everything set to the absolute lowest settings, resolution turned down, and all the fancy stuff turned off, the poor thing was choking. We're talking about 25 FPS, and honestly, that's not playing the game. That's more like watching a slow-motion PowerPoint. It's barely keeping up. Feels like I'm gaming in 2003. Then came Fortnite, and yeah, that was a disaster. The system froze the moment I dropped into the map. Couldn't move, couldn't build, couldn't even rage quit properly. At that point, the only move left was to reach for the power button and end its suffering. And now, here comes the part I've been most excited to share with you. The upgrade. We're about to take this little office PC and turn it into something way more powerful. So yeah, let's grab a screwdriver and start tearing this thing apart. Right away, you can tell this system was built with one goal in mind: save space. Everything inside is packed super tight, which looks neat, until you realize it leaves almost no room for a full-size GPU. So instead of fighting the case, I'm ditching it entirely and moving everything into a new home. One that can fit any graphics card I want. With that out of the way, the first big step is upgrading the CPU. I swapped out the poor little Pentium for a Xeon E31241V3, which cost me just about 10 bucks. This thing has 4 cores, 8 threads, boosts up to 3.9 GHz, and yeah, it's roughly 250% faster than what we started with. Next up, RAM. Running on a single stick these days just isn't cutting it, so I dropped in another 8 GB for a total of 16 GB dual channel. To save a bit of money, I'm reusing the stock cooler, though it does need a custom mounting bracket since the original one was built into the SFF case. Alright, let's get into the fun part, the actual build. I'm using this plastic open frame test bench to hold the motherboard, power supply, and GPU GPU. You can find one of these pretty much anywhere online, and they're super cheap. First up, I mounted the motherboard. Now this frame clearly wasn't made for this board, only 3 screws lined up, but honestly, it's solid enough. Then I dropped in the power supply, super easy fit. For storage, I went with a 500GB SATA SSD, but since there's no real mounting spot, I just kinda let it chill right here for now. And now the star of the show, the RTX 3050, 6GB. I picked this one for a simple reason. It only pulls around 70 watts, which means my tiny 255-watt PSU can actually handle it. Pretty nice trade-off for the power it delivers. With everything hooked up, the build's done. Compact, open, and ready to go. You can even hang it on a wall or just set it right on your desk. It barely takes up more room than the old case lying flat. It booted up perfectly and detected all the new hardware. That's already a good sign. Now let's see just how much this little PC has transformed. Starting with Valorant at 1080p and max settings, the system easily pushed around 200 FPS, which is pretty much the cap for this CPU. Compared to before the upgrade, that's almost a 10 times improvement. From struggling to stay alive to buttery smooth gameplay. Honestly, this feels like a massive win. Turning a tiny budget office PC into a legit gaming rig is definitely what I'd call a sweet upgrade deal.
Healers down.
Alright, let's fire up CS2 at 1080p, everything cranked to high. And honestly, I wasn't expecting this. The game stayed well above 60 FPS the entire time, averaging around 100. And even in the middle of firefights, it only dipped to about 70 to 80 FPS. That's kinda crazy for a CPU that's over 11 years old. This thing still packs some serious punch, especially if you're trying to build a gaming PC on a budget. But here's where things get wild. Minecraft. At 1080p on fast settings, this setup absolutely flies. I'm talking 500 to 600 FPS in some moments. When I blew up a bunch of TNT, yeah, it dropped to around 100 FPS, but that's still super smooth. Then I bumped it up to fabulous mode, now we're at about 300 FPS. Still buttery, and even with shaders on, which usually kills frame rates, it stayed above 60 FPS the whole time. For a budget build like this, that's insane performance. Next up, I fired up Fortnite at 1080p, and the results were pretty decent, actually. We're looking at around 100 FPS on average, which is perfectly playable. But you can tell this game leans a lot heavier on the CPU than the GPU. The graphics card still had plenty of headroom, but the processor was clearly sweating a bit trying to keep up. It's not quite as buttery smooth as the previous games, but if you're a casual player who's not chasing every single frame, this setup will absolutely get the job done. And for the final test, we're jumping into GTA 5, running a heavily modded version with upgraded visuals. The FPS hovered around 50 FPS, which isn't mind-blowing, but honestly, it's smoother than I expected. For a build at this price point, that's a pretty respectable result. It might not break any performance records, but it definitely proves you can still enjoy some great gaming without breaking the bank. It looks like the CPU runs a bit hot with the stock cooler, so if you plan to push it harder, I'd recommend upgrading to a 4 heat pipe air cooler for better temps. You'll also need a fan power adapter since Dell uses a weird 5-pin connector instead of the standard 4-pin one. On top of that, you could swap in a higher wattage power supply and throw in any GPU you want. And just like that, we've turned a weak little office PC into a legit gaming machine. If you found this video helpful, drop a like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.